Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the wild Fawn Manor. And as you can see, I'm wearing my cowboy duds again. And that's because I'm finally here to talk about this book, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Lonesome Dove, which is the last book that I started in June, the last week of June, I started this book, Lonesome Dove. And I'm finally ready to talk about it. Hey, this book was kind of long. It's kind of a long book. And before I started, everybody was telling me, man, this is the greatest Western ever written, and you're going to think it's the greatest Western ever written. And I was like, no, just because it's super long doesn't mean it's the greatest Western ever written. There are like a lot of really great Westerns out there. This is probably going to be good, but the best ever, it was. Almost certainly. It's almost certainly the greatest Western ever written. I mean, I'll make certain of it, I think, by reading a lot of other contenders before the next June on the Range. But I'm pretty sure that this is probably the greatest Western ever written. This is an amazing book. It's fantastic. I loved this book. This book is so good that it completely destroyed my 100 favorite books list. It busted its way in there onto that list. So I guess I'm going to have to get a fancy pants edition of this if one exists. Anything is better than this with these tired, lazy cowboys on this cover. This book had a really good cover at one time, but now it's got this cover. And it's had another bad cover or two since that cool cover that it started out with. But anyway, I digress. There's a lot going on in this book. It's basically about Augustus and Coll. Now, Augustus and Coll were two rangers from back in the day, and they had many adventures, and they're both really capable characters, much more capable than anybody else in this book. And it's because they're, of their experience as rangers. So the book starts out with Gus. Gus is the more likable of the two. He's a lot of fun, Gus. What a great character this is. This character is just so entertaining and funny. But he's also, like I said, really capable. When it hits the fan, you want this guy with you. Because even though at the beginning of the book he's all lazy and just kind of hangs out and drinks and plays cards and, avoids work whenever possible, once things start out, this is the guy you want, Gus. He's awesome. Now, of course, Coll is the main guy. He is the taciturn hero of the book, I guess. He's one of the main guys. Very capable as well. I mean, you don't mess with Coll. I mean, he is the captain. He was the captain of the Rangers. And now he is the leader of the Hat Creek Cattle Company. And basically the plot of this novel is pretty simple. It has a pretty simple plot. Basically, it's about those two guys, and they lead a cattle drive from Texas, where they're at. They're at the small town of Lonesome Dove in Texas, and they go up to Montana, which is a long trip with all these cattle. So what starts them on their way? Why on earth would they do that? Well, their old companion, Jake, I forgot his name for a minute. I had to look at my notes. Jake shows up. And now Jake is super handsome, and all the ladies love Jake. But as you can see, he's pretty shifty, and you can't trust this guy, really. I mean, he's pretty much good for nothing, really, old Jake. But he's charming and handsome and likable. And he is a character that you kind of like in this book. Now he comes and he shows up to the Hat Creek Cattle Company with all kinds of stories about Montana and how great Montana is. And if anybody had sense, they would bring, a bunch of cattle up to Montana because it would be a cattleman's paradise. Now Coll hears this, and he's been discontented for a while. He hasn't had any real challenges since he was a ranger. And he hears this and he decides, you know what? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So he decides, you know what? We're going to pack up and we're going to get some cattle, which they promptly steal from Mexico, and we'll all go up to Montana, just like Jake said. Now, there are a couple other members of the Hat Creek Cattle Company that are going along that are also ex-Rangers. We've got Dietz, who is a really capable guy, probably the most capable guy in this book, other than Colin Augustus. He's a great scout. Really interesting character, Dietz. And then we got P.I. P.I. is really loyal, heart of gold, but dumb as a rock. But these two are the old timers. Now there's also Newt. Now Newt is a young guy, and he's actually Carl's son, but Carl won't admit it. Carl had a brief relationship with a prostitute, and this kid Newt was the result. And this prostitute eventually took up with Jake because Jake's no good, and then Jake left, and the prostitute died. This kid was left on his own. And so Carl and Augustus, they took the kid in. But Carl won't admit that this kid is his son because he kind of made a mistake when he got together with his prostitute and then left her. He probably never should have done that. So he can't admit to this kid that he's his father. He can't do it. So that is the situation at the beginning of this book with young Newt. Newt is like this young guy, heart of gold, really good kid. Great kid, Newt. And we also have Lorena, who is the most beautiful woman anywhere around Lonesome Dove. And she promptly falls in love with Jake because Jake's no good and all the ladies love Jake. So once this cattle drive happens, Jake's too lazy to actually do any work, but he wants to go along anyway, and Lorena decides to tag along with Jake. But eventually, Lorena ends up with Gus. But Gus is in love with Clara. Clara is the love of Gus's life. And one of the reasons Gus is even going along on this trip is because they're going to go past where Clara lives. But she dumped him years ago and she married this other doofus guy. But still, he wants to go and see her because she was the love of his life. Now, meanwhile, we've got July Johnson, a Sheriff July Johnson, who's hot on the trail of Jake because Jake actually just showed up to the Hat Creek outfit because he accidentally shot some guy. And now he's on the run from this guy, July Johnson, who's hot on his trail. Actually, he's not hot on his trail because his wife left him and took off. So now he's going to go off and look for the wife before he looks for Jake. It's a whole thing. And Lorena over there is groaning because, she does that. Anyway, also, there's a really terrifying villain in this, Blue Duck. You got to watch out for Blue Duck. Blue Duck's, he's very frightening. Anyway, a lot of characters. I've gone on and on about the characters. But here's the thing about this book. This book isn't about the cattle drive. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Did I mention Dish? Oh, I forgot to mention Dish. Dish is the top hand, who's also in love with Lorena. Look at him. He's in love with Lorena. He can't help himself. Who wouldn't be? Anyway, Dish is the top hand. I almost forgot about Dish. Anyway, so yeah, all of these guys are on the way to Montana with a bunch of cattle that they stole from Mexico. And the main thing about this book, it is a novel about these characters, but it's a tragedy, first of all. You might be thinking it wouldn't be from the style of the writing, particularly at the beginning of this book. You notice it right away. It has that kind of folksy style, almost as if someone's just telling you this story around the campfire. only a story that's 800 pages long, but it's got that kind of feel to it. So you might not think that would work if tragic things happen, but it does. It really does. It pulls you in, this book. Gets you really involved with all of these characters and all of these character situations. And basically, it's about the decisions that we make and how the decisions we make affect our lives and other people's lives. And there's time after time in this book where you can look back to something earlier in the book and see if just a different decision had been made, everything would be different. Earlier on, when I was in the first, third of this book or something, I thought there were a lot of scenes that probably didn't really need to be in there. They were all entertaining to read, but I'm like, does this scene really need to be in here? Like, there's this whole thing about July Johnson's deputy who's following July Johnson to tell him that his wife left, and he's trying to find July Johnson. And in the process, has these different adventures, which are just kind of seem to be in there. And in one of them, he meets this woman, this farmer, who tries to convince him to stay with her. And he's tempted, but he moves on because he's loyal to July Johnson. And it was a fun little episode and entertaining, but I was thinking, why is this in this book? Why is that episode in this at all? It seems extraneous. It wasn't. Much later in the book, you realize that for this character, that was the point where he could have made a choice that would have changed his life. If he had just stayed with that woman at that point, everything would be different, and his fate would be very different. And you realize when you get to a certain point in this book, wow, if things had just gone differently, if he had made another decision right then at that point in this book, this wouldn't have happened, or this would have been different. There's so many points like that in this book. The whole cattle drive has a lot of tragic things that happen to certain characters because Cal made a decision to go and do this whole drive, which turns out to be incredibly dangerous and difficult. And he just decided, you know what? I heard this from Jake, one of the least reliable people ever. And he decides, you know what? I'm doing this, and we're all going to go on this big trip. And that decision changes everything. And there are a lot of points in this book where a lot of characters are thinking, man, if I had only decided not to go on this trip, this wouldn't have happened, or that wouldn't have happened. Maybe things would be better. And everybody in this book, or most characters in this book, have moments like that where they could have made different decisions and their lives would have been different. In the meantime, you have all these tremendously entertaining episodes, fascinating characters, a lot of action and excitement. And the stakes are very, very high because the characters are so well done that as you get deeper and deeper into the novel, you're completely invested. So while I was skeptical in the first parts of the book, thinking, this is all right, by the end of the book, it's just like, you're deeply involved in what's going on. So it's great. What an experience. This book was amazing. Now I hear this is part of what became the Lonesome Dove saga. There are 3 other books in this series, the Lonesome Dove series. And I'm going to read the next one that came after this and then go back to the prequels, because that's the way you do it with prequels. But I don't think those are going to be as good as this. I hear they're not, but what could be? This book is amazing. Read this book. You should read this book. Okay, I'll shut up now. I've gone on at length. Man, sorry about that. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.